Hello and welcome to the session on mastering ITTO framework. Have you ever looked at project management processes and wondered why there are so many inputs, tools and techniques and outputs, and do I really need to memorize all of them? If you have ever felt that way, you are definitely not alone. And in this video, we are going to make ITTO much easier to understand by looking at them as a simple story of how work gets done. We will start with something simple we all do every day, following a process. Then we will connect that everyday experience to project management, break down input, tools and techniques, and output, and finally look at why 49 processes and 700 plus ITTOs do not feel overwhelming. The goal is not to simply memorize a long list. The goal is to understand the logic behind the framework so that you can use it in your study, your PMP preparation, and most importantly, in the real world project situations. So, let's begin by asking the simple question: is everything we actually do a process? Think about something as simple as brushing your teeth. You probably do it even without thinking about it. You pick up your toothbrush, apply toothpaste and some water, and brush your teeth using a particular technique, and finally, you get the result: clean teeth. Now, imagine that someone asks you to explain exactly how you achieve that result. You would naturally describe three things. First, you did what first what did you do to start the process? This is your input: your toothbrush, your toothpaste and water. Second, what did you actually do? You used a method or technique, your brushing technique. And third, what did you get at the end? That is your output: clean tooth. This simple example give us the basic behind ITTO. In project management, we also start with something we need. We perform a set of actions using appropriate methods and we produce a result. So when you hear the word process, don't think of something complicated. Think of it as a goal-oriented sequence of action designed to achieve a specific result. And once you understand that idea, ITTO becomes much more intuitive. Now let's break down the framework into its four components. Now let's open up with ITTO framework. The first component is input. Input are things we need to perform before we can begin the process. In a project, this could include your templates, regulations, information, or data coming from your earlier processes. Next comes tools and techniques. Tools are things that help you perform the work in maybe Microsoft project or specific diagnostic equipments are the examples, and techniques are method we use to apply those tools and knowledge. This could include expert judgment, interpersonal skills. And finally, we have our output. The output is the result produced by the process. For example, a project charter or completed project plan is an example of output. Here is important part. ITTO is just not a list to memorize. Think of it as a story. Something comes in, we use appropriate tools and techniques to work on it, and something comes out. That pattern repeats throughout the project management. And once you start looking at that pattern, the framework becomes much easier to follow. And let's make this even more practical by comparing project management with the activity we have already understood. Let's return to our brushing your teeth example and put it side by side with creating a project management plan. For brushing your teeth, your inputs were simple: toothpaste, brush, and water. For creating a project plan, the inputs are far more professional, things such as templates, organization process assets, and regulations. And then we have the work itself. When brushing your teeth, you used a circular scrubbing technique. And when creating a project plan, you may use expert judgment, project management software such as Microsoft Project, and other appropriate techniques. And finally, there is output. For brushing your teeth, the output is clear, clean teeth. For project planning, the output is project management plan. And notice something important here. The subject is completely different, but logic is exactly the same. Input, tools and techniques, and output. And this is why understanding ITTO framework is more powerful than simply memorizing them. And when you understand this flow, you can ask yourself three simple questions whenever you encounter a process. What do I need to start? What will help me perform the work? And what results should I produce? And that mindset can help understand both framework and the practical work of project management. Now we arrive at part that often makes students nervous, the numbers. There are 49 processes and more than 700 ITTOs associated with those processes. At first glance, that sounds like huge memorization exercise. But let's pause for a moment. Do I really need to treat ITTO as completely separate piece of information? The better approach is to look for repetition. Many of the same concepts appear again and again. For example, expert judgment and templates are common examples of tools and techniques or input that support project management activities. So instead of thinking I have more than 700 things to memorize, think I have a framework that repeats across many processes. Imagine learning a language. You do not memorize every sentence someone could possibly say. You learn the common words and patterns, and then you use those patterns to understand the new sentences. ITTO can be approached in the similar way. Learn the common patterns, understand why input is needed, understand how tools and techniques help, and understand what the process is trying to produce. And once you understand the logic, the large numbers become much less intimidating. And this leads us to the most important takeaway of entire session. Let's bring everything together. First, remember what a process is. A process is goal-oriented set of actions used to achieve a specific result. Second, remember ITTO model. Every one of 49 processes is presented through input, tools and techniques, and output. And third, focus on commonality rather than complexity. You do not want your study strategy to become a giant exercise in memorizing hundreds of isolated terms. Instead, look for recurring concepts such as expert judgment and templates and understand how they fit into the process. And finally, remember the real world application. The purpose of learning this framework is not only to pass the exam, and as a project manager, you constantly need to understand what information you have, what resources and methods can help you, and what result do you need to produce. So, whenever you study ITTO, try to turn it into a small story. What comes in, what happens in the middle, and what comes out. And that simple habit can make the entire framework easier to understand and remember. And that brings us to the end of our introduction to the ITTO framework. Today, we started with something very familiar, brushing our teeth, and used it to understand professional project management concept. We learned that basic logic is simple. Input provide what we need to begin. Tools and techniques help us perform the work, and output represent the result. We discussed why understanding recurring pattern is more useful than trying to memorize everything as isolated information. I hope this session has made ITTO feel less complicated and a lot more practical. And if you found this video useful, Please like the video, share it with a fellow project manager or PMP student, and subscribe to the channel for more practical deep dive into project management concepts. And remember, don't study only to pass the exam, study to become a project manager that everyone wants on their team. Thank you for watching. Keep learning, and I will see you in the next video.